Nobody has ever put it to you this plainly. The biggest mistake wasn't falling in love. It was insisting and pushing forward when there was no longer any space left for you. Because the moment you feel her slipping away, your first instinct is to do more, explain more, show up more, be more present. And that's exactly where almost everyone stumbles. Not out of weakness, but out of fear. Fear of letting go. Fear of accepting that you can't force someone to want you. Yet something powerful happens when you do the opposite. When you pull back quietly, without making a scene. When you stop demanding, stop chasing, stop justifying. That small act of withdrawal, that quiet refusal, starts making more noise than any grand speech ever could. Not because you're punishing her, but because you shatter the old pattern where you were always the one who was endlessly available. Welcome to Relationship Psychology, where we explore the deeper truths of connection and self-worth. This isn't about playing games or vanishing dramatically. It's about understanding why, the instant you step back into your own value, something begins to shift inside her. Desire isn't sparked by pressure or persistence. It awakens through absence, through uncertainty, through the sudden realization that you're no longer a sure thing. And you don't create that shift by giving more. You create it by stopping the constant offering of yourself. At first, it's tough. You wonder if you should send that message, if you should clear things up, if you're coming across as too distant. That doubt is completely normal, because for so long, we've all been taught that real love means always being there, no matter what. Nobody taught us that constant availability can drain your worth the moment you're no longer chosen. Real change begins right here. Not when she reacts, but when you decide not to betray yourself anymore. When you choose silence, not out of pride, but out of genuine self-respect. When you finally grasp that you don't have to chase anyone to prove your value, that you don't need to beg to be desired, and that stepping away is itself a powerful form of communication. From this point forward, you'll understand something crucial. Your absence doesn't manufacture desire. It awakens it. She already knew who you were. What she didn't know was how it would feel once you were no longer there at her fingertips. And that quiet, uncomfortable feeling is precisely what starts making her think. Before we go deeper, do this small, conscious thing. Drop a like if you've ever noticed that pushing harder only pushed her further away. Subscribe and turn on notifications because here, we don't talk about chasing. We talk about reclaiming your rightful place. And in the comments, leave just 2 words that capture the decision you're making starting today. I respected myself. You didn't do it because you stopped caring. You didn't do it because it didn't hurt. You did it because you finally understood that your true value begins the moment you stop begging to be chosen. When you pull back, nothing dramatic happens right away. No sudden flood of messages, no emotional confessions, no movie-style plot twist. And that's exactly where so many men lose faith. They think nothing changed, that their silence went unnoticed, that withdrawing was pointless. But what you can't see is the movement happening beneath the surface, the quiet shift taking place inside her mind while you remain still. While you stay silent, her perception of you begins to transform. Before, you were a given. She knew you were always there, that no matter what, you'd respond, you'd show up. When that certainty vanishes, doubt creeps in. Not loud, dramatic doubt, but a persistent, whispering one. She starts wondering, why isn't he reaching out? Why isn't he fighting for this? Why isn't he trying to fix things? And those unanswered questions carry far more weight than any text you could have sent. Desire doesn't work the way we've been told. It doesn't grow through explanations. It doesn't build through persistence. It doesn't strengthen through total availability. Desire ignites when something is no longer guaranteed. When you withdraw calmly, without blame, without drama, without trying to punish. She stops seeing you as a fixed constant and starts seeing you as something she could actually lose. And that single change alters everything. You're no longer there to soothe her doubts. You're no longer confirming your endless presence. You're no longer holding the entire dynamic up by yourself. Something profound happens here. She begins to feel your absence as a kind of presence. Not because you're messaging her, but because the lack of you disrupts her emotional comfort zone. Other men may appear, conversations may flow, distractions may come, but none of them can fill the exact space left by a man who walked away with dignity and zero desperation. And while you quietly go on with your life, without proving anything, without provoking, without chasing, her mind starts turning. Because desire isn't born from effort, It's born from the possibility of loss. When your withdrawal is authentic, it doesn't register as rejection. It registers as self-worth. That's why this isn't about manipulation. It's about grasping something essential. When you respect yourself, you completely change how others perceive you. Not by doing more, but by stopping the behaviors that were quietly diminishing you. And even if you can't see it yet, that's where the real transformation begins. There's one truth almost nobody talks about, and it's the reason so many fail. Desire isn't created from nothing. It gets reactivated. When you step back, she doesn't suddenly develop brand new feelings for you. What happens is that feelings that already existed but had gone dormant start stirring again. As long as you were endlessly available, explaining, justifying, insisting, your presence became background noise. Constant things become invisible, not because they lack value, but because they stop creating emotional tension. When you withdraw, that tension returns, not as chaos, but as quiet unease. She begins asking herself, why isn't he here anymore? Why isn't he trying to win me back? Why isn't he pushing for closure? And in that space, something deeply human occurs. Her mind starts filling the void you left behind. Before, there was no room to imagine you because you were always right there. Now there is, and imagination is always far more powerful than reality. This is where so many men get it wrong. They believe that if she's thinking about them, it must be because they did something impressive. No, it's because they finally stopped interfering. Your withdrawal doesn't shout, doesn't threaten, doesn't pressure. It simply creates space. And that empty space makes her remember how she felt with you. Not when you were pleading, but back when you didn't have to prove anything. That's when desire truly reawakens. Not in begging, not in long explanations, not in just checking in messages, but in the calm, steady absence of a man who no longer needs to be chosen to keep moving forward. While you're not trying to trigger anything, she begins rebuilding you in her mind. And that mental reconstruction is infinitely stronger than any perfectly worded text. Desire doesn't respond to logic. It responds to perception. And when your status shifts from always there to no longer guaranteed, everything moves. Not because you want her back, not because you're scheming, but because you chose self-respect when the easiest path was to keep chasing. And that quiet self-respect is felt even when no words are spoken. There is a very precise moment when everything begins to change for her, and it almost never happens when you think it will. It doesn't happen the day you leave. It doesn't happen the moment you stop texting. It happens when she realizes you no longer react. Before, even in silence, you were still emotionally tethered, waiting, available, connected to her every move or lack of it. Now you're not. Now you don't fix misunderstandings. You don't enter long explanations. You don't try to look good. And that unsettles her deeply because she's losing something she had taken for granted: your response. When a woman senses she can no longer provoke a reaction from you, she starts feeling emotionally off balance. Not because she wants to control you, but because she was used to knowing exactly where you stood. Now she doesn't. That's the exact point where her mind kicks into gear, where questions arise, where memories mix with uncertainty. She starts wondering if she's truly losing you, if maybe she went too far, if this man who was always there might actually be gone for good. And most importantly, she begins to see you from a new angle, not as someone endlessly available, but as someone who chose to walk away. Your withdrawal isn't aggressive, cold, or vengeful. It's silent, and that's exactly why it carries so much weight. You're not punishing her. You're simply drawing an invisible boundary that wasn't there before. While other men react, explain, chase, you do nothing, and that nothing ends up having more impact than any attempt to win her back ever could. Because when a man stops reacting, he stops being predictable. And when predictability disappears, desire can return. Not for what he's doing, but for what he's no longer doing. Eventually, she starts comparing, even if she doesn't want to. It's not a conscious choice. It happens automatically. With other men, conversations may be smooth, attention may be there, but it lacks weight, lacks impact, lacks depth. Then you appear, not as a message, but as a memory. She remembers how it felt when you didn't need anything from her, when you were calm, when you weren't trying to convince her, when your energy stood on its own without asking permission. That's when all other comparisons begin to crumble. The others are available, quick to respond, eager to please, and you are not. You withdrew quietly, without speeches, without warnings, and that contrast becomes stark. Not because you're better than anyone else, but because you're not competing. Desire doesn't awaken when someone tries harder. It awakens when someone no longer has to try at all. While others seek her attention, you're simply not there. Paradoxically, that absence places you above the rest in her mind. She starts noticing that with you there was no rush, no anxiety, no pressure, just something rare, masculine calm. And when a woman has tasted noisy, frantic connections and then remembers a man who was steady silence, the difference hits hard. Not because she wants to come back right away, not because she's certain of anything, but because she realizes she let go of something truly different. This is where many men would win, if only they never reappeared. The memory only works when you don't destroy it with unnecessary presence. Your withdrawal lets her compare you from absence, not from disappointment. And that's the key. When you weigh a man who respected himself against men who overoffer, the outcome is always the same. One feels disposable, the other feels precious, and without saying a word, you begin to win the comparison. This is why chasing kills desire. When you insist, you remove the other person's chance to feel loss. Every clarifying message, every attempt to look good, every unnecessary explanation gives her the comfort of knowing you're still there. And desire cannot coexist with absolute certainty. When a man keeps pushing, he silently communicates something. I can't let go. I need you. My emotional balance depends on your reply. Those words are never spoken, but they are felt. That doesn't spark attraction. It creates leverage. She stops wondering about you because she already has the answer. You're always available. When you withdraw, the opposite occurs. There's no confirmation, no closure, no emotional validation, and that lack creates an unease that cannot be ignored. Not because you want her to suffer, but because human beings need to make sense of what they're losing. Your silence isn't passive absence. It's an active withdrawal of energy. You stop feeding the dynamic. You stop carrying the connection alone. You stop giving explanations nobody asked for. And suddenly, she's left alone with her thoughts. She starts wondering if she made a mistake, if she took something precious for granted, if you were more valuable than she realized. None of this happens when you insist, because insisting soothes. And soothed certainty does not produce desire. Your withdrawal, on the other hand, doesn't soothe. It unsettles. And that unsettlement isn't wounded pride. It's the impact of losing a man who knew how to leave without begging. That's why this isn't about doing more. It's about stopping what has been diminishing you. Because when a man withdraws with genuine respect, he doesn't lose his presence. He transforms it. There comes a silent, almost invisible moment when you stop waiting for anything. You're no longer checking to see if she texted. You're no longer staring at your phone with anxiety. You're no longer spinning scenarios in your head. And even though you may not realize it, that's exactly when you're most present in her mind. Because when a man stops acting out of need, his energy shifts. There's no more urgency, no more need for control, no more fear of loss. And she feels it, even from a distance. Something is different, not because you tell her, but because she can no longer read you so easily. Before, she knew your exact emotional location. A word from her could activate you. A silence from her could unsettle you. A gesture from her could move you. Now that access is gone, and the loss creates unease. Not because she wants to hurt you, but because she was used to having you emotionally available. Your absence stops feeling temporary and starts feeling real, not as punishment, but as natural consequence. She begins wondering if she really lost you this time, if there's no going back, if the man who was always there won't be anymore. And that question weighs heavier than any argument ever could. Meanwhile, you're elsewhere, not waiting, not plotting, not calculating. You're simply moving forward, and that quiet forward motion is what unsettles her most, because nothing awakens desire more powerfully than a man who no longer has anything to prove. You're not trying to make her come back. You're not trying to elicit a reaction. You're living, and paradoxically, that's when she truly starts feeling that she's losing you for real. Not because you're rejecting her with words, but because you stopped holding the connection up single-handedly. And when one side stops carrying a bond, the other finally feels its weight. This is the moment your withdrawal stops being an action and becomes an emotional reality for her. And without even knowing it, you've reclaimed your position. There comes a point where she stops wondering what you're doing and starts wondering what she has lost. It doesn't happen suddenly. It doesn't come with drama. It arrives quietly. She notices there are no more traces of you in her daily life. You don't appear. You don't react. You're not waiting. And the absence that once felt manageable begins to take up space. Not because you're doing something, but precisely because you're no longer doing anything. That's when many women feel something they weren't expecting. Emptiness. Not the emptiness of anger. Not the emptiness of wounded ego. The emptiness of realizing someone truly important is no longer emotionally available. She starts remembering little things, moments, gestures that she used to take for granted. She doesn't recall your explanations. She remembers how she felt with you back when you didn't have to convince her of anything. And that memory carries weight because she now understands you didn't leave impulsively. You left calmly, coherently, with self-respect, and that hurts more than any fight ever could. Often, this is when some try to test the waters, an ambiguous message, a casual excuse, a simple, "How are you?" Not always to return, sometimes just to check if you're still there. And here lies the turning point. If you reappear the old way, the spark fades, the perception crumbles. But if you hold your ground, if you remain the man who withdrew without begging, she begins to face something uncomfortable. She didn't lose you because of a fight or a single mistake. She lost you because you were no longer willing to stay where you weren't chosen. That realization completely shifts how she sees you. You're no longer the one waiting. You're the one who kept walking. And even if she never says it out loud, that reconfigures her desire entirely. Not because you ignored her, but because you chose yourself. And when a man chooses himself, he no longer needs to prove anything. His absence speaks louder than any words. Then comes a moment you weren't even looking for, but one that changes everything. You realize you no longer need her to come back. Not because you stopped caring, not because there were no feelings, but because something inside you has realigned. You no longer act from waiting. You no longer do things hoping for a reaction. You no longer count the hours or analyze silences. That's the biggest shift of all. When a man stops needing, he stops radiating lack. And when lack disappears, perception transforms completely. She feels it. She senses you're no longer emotionally available. There's no invisible string she can pull anymore. She can't regain your attention easily. And there appears an uncomfortable emotion, irreversibility. She starts understanding that this isn't a break, not a tactic, not wounded pride. It's an inner decision. And when a woman realizes a man no longer needs her to feel whole, something breaks in her old sense of security, not because she wants to control you, but because she loses the privileged place she once held in your emotional world. While you continue living your life, she begins processing what it really means to have lost you. Not the man who chased, not the man who explained, not the man who stayed, but the man who chose to leave, without bitterness, without demanding anything in return. This is where desire stops being impulsive and becomes something deeper. Because now she no longer sees you as someone desperate to return. She sees you as someone capable of truly leaving, and that quiet, firm capacity is one of the hardest things to forget. Here, you've already won something essential, even if she never comes back. Because when a man stops needing, he reclaims something worth more than any relationship, his own center. From that place, nothing else defines you anymore. And this is how it all closes, not with loud victory, but with quiet understanding. Your withdrawal wasn't punishment. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't a move to provoke anything. It was simply the natural consequence of choosing yourself. She may never admit it. She may deny it. She may rationalize it 1,000 ways. But she felt it. She felt you lose interest in playing a role that no longer fit who you are. She felt you stop fighting for a place that was beneath you. She felt the change the moment you stopped chasing. And that has a profound impact, because there's one thing almost no one tells you. Desire doesn't die when a man leaves. It dies when a man stays at the cost of his own dignity. You did the opposite. You withdrew without blame, without drama, without trying to look good. And in doing so, you reclaimed your rightful place. She may come back, she may not. None of that defines you anymore. What matters is this. When you respected yourself, you stopped needing someone else to validate your worth. She lost a man who knew how to be present, but also knew how to leave, and you gained something far greater than any reply from her. Coherence, calm, dignity. Hold on to this truth because it sums up the entire journey. She may have lost something precious, but you gained the most important thing of all, yourself. Before you go, make this final conscious gesture. Drop a like if today you understand that stepping back was also an act of self-respect. Subscribe and turn on the bell because here we don't talk about chasing. We talk about becoming a man who never betrays himself again. And in the comments, leave the 2 words that define the choice you made when it felt hardest. I respected myself, not to prove anything, not to force anything, but because you finally understood something essential. When a man chooses himself, he never again places himself where he had to beg to be desired.